Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Yeah, well, time to be talking about the issues we're always banging on about, Jim. I mean, what a week it's been.
Well, we have Dr. David Suzuki warning pipelines will be blown up if politicians don't act on climate change. Was that a threat, a promise, or a warning, or a combination of the three?
Yeah, well, that's just it. I think that's what everyone's talking about. Everyone's wondering. There was a time when David Suzuki was this genial, avuncular geneticist who was on TV with the things, and he was expanding our minds with information about science and the natural world. It was wonderful. That David Suzuki is still in the archives of the CBC, I guess, but the David Suzuki who's out there walking the streets now is a very different one. And, those are dangerous words, so much so that the foundation that bears his name, the Suzuki Foundation, had to put out an explanation and distance themselves. He was wearing a David Suzuki Foundation jacket with the emblem in it when he made the comments about blowing up pipelines. So I guess they felt they had to, but, the Suzuki Foundation itself has some pretty radical positions. They like to often, they say they do, honest research. I've seen a lot of their research that I would say is not really science-based. All the same, though, to see them distancing themselves in this way shows you that they are worried that the public is going to say, well, wait a second, blowing up pipelines, who wants to do that? Yesterday we saw in Quebec, some protesters who claim to be behind the Wet'suwet'en of British Columbia, which is, that's a whole other topic we need to get into. But in supposed support of it, they used thermite, which I believe is an explosive material, to do something on rail lines, blow them up, I guess. So already one could say that David Suzuki's words have been followed by actions that resemble the destruction of infrastructure using explosive techniques. Is there a direct connection? Was Suzuki counseling people to do that? I don't know if I have the answer to that, but these things have a way of inspiring people. There's folks out there with a screw loose who will actually see this as a call to action, and I think it's incredibly dangerous. The fact that Suzuki has done very little to clarify it. I think he's issued some sort of half-baked statement, but I'm going to say that he believes that pipelines are going to be exploded, and he doesn't seem to think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, when I saw his, follow-up statement, or no, I'm not advocating that, but, and then there was a lot of explanation, and then people are saying, well, anarchists have always used violence as a means to getting their things, but basically it's terrorism. It's just terrorism no matter what the excuse is. It's terrorism. You blow up rail lines, people can die, hazardous waste can be spilled. How is that helpful to the environment? I look at the spill of 4 tanker cars in the river by Squamish 20 years ago. It wiped out all the fish, and they're just coming back now. It was carrying caustic soda that you might know as oven cleaner. So just a minor railway accident can cause disastrous things. What if a passenger train was next on that? So we have these nasty little people here. You want to make a point? Like perhaps not use propane heaters while you're blocking traffic to protest LNG.
Yeah, Well, I mean, the very definition of terrorism is that you're using violence to try to create a certain impression among people.
Now,
and by that definition, the unlawful use of intentional violence in a political sense, that's what's being advocated. That's what we're already seeing in Canada. It's happening. That's what that rail incident was. And, I don't think the public is going to remain tolerant of that. So those who think that, because they have a viewpoint about, what they think should be done about environmental issues, which a lot of this stuff is connected to, that is, a way to win an argument. I don't think there's actually any argument about climate or the environment. We need to take all the steps that we have available and more to protect the climate and the earth, because we need to live on it. This is not a radical fringe view. It's something that everyone I know shares. So the idea there's some fringe that is saying, you don't understand, so I'm going to blow up your infrastructure until you do, is, well, it's beyond criminal. It's just stupidity, and it's going in the wrong direction.
And of course, environmental groups have complained about the police spying on them. Now we know why the police are spying on them. They fear that they're going to eventually resort to violence.
Yeah, with this Coastal GasLink thing, there's been a flare-up. There was a continuing violation of an injunction. People were deliberately refusing to acknowledge what a court had ruled in terms of trying to stop a federally or a provincially approved project of an LNG pipeline, and taking all sorts of measures to try to slow down. I mean, vandalizing equipment and threatening anyone who wanted to go near there. They even blockaded 500 workers into camps in northwest BC, and they were running out of food and water. And, I think the police didn't want to go in and stage a big, noisy, intervention that would get into the headlines, but inevitably that is what happened to some extent.
Well, what got into the headlines is that 2 journalists were arrested and detained. That made headlines.
Well, yeah, I mean, it did, but those headlines are manufactured. It's the nectar of years often of careful activism to set up that payday moment when that becomes the headline. I saw the New York Times was writing about 2 journalists detained in Canada. Well, I follow this stuff. Like you, I've been a journalist for a long time. I think the craft, the trade of journalism is one that is often criticized and subject to all sorts of scrutiny. And to do it requires some bravery and commitment and knowledge. Around the world, every year there's over 100 journalists who are killed in doing their jobs. One thing that doesn't help journalists is when people impersonate them and say, hey, I'm a journalist. And they're not really, because you get into sticky situations in war zones and in dictatorships. And, the value of having journalistic eyes and ears on a bona fide scene, is well established as a way to provide the conscience of the world in situations. And whenever people abuse, the role and title of a journalist, they are causing potential harm for working journalists, real journalists. Now, if you're a journalist, one thing you will never do is embed yourself into a situation where you sign an undertaking that you will only tell the story the way that's approved by the place where you're embedding yourself. But that's what the protesters did. Those 2 journalists who call themselves journalists, they're, okay, maybe documentary makers. Sure, be a storyteller. Go and do that work and bring your story to the world. I'm 100% in favor of that. But when you sign that agreement that you will do the propaganda work of whatever it is you're covering, which is what those 2 pretend journalists did, then you're endangering other journalists. You're misleading the public, and I think it's not surprising. That was clearly the intent, and now there's a whole bunch of people who probably believe that some real journalists were arrested. Both of them have been embedded for organizations that are seeking to make the pipeline project so expensive that it will be stopped. That's their goal. That's not going to work. They're trying to embarrass Canada and make it seem to other countries that we are an intolerant place that likes to arrest journalists. That's not true. It's a lie. And this is something they've been working on. I mean, these campaigns are planned out, Jim. They're almost storyboarded. So you can, I mean, I've seen so many of these. I saw this one coming, weeks, months ago. You get to the moment. What do they want? They want a police raid. Why? So they can take pictures of it and say police brutality. How do they cause it to be that the police are carrying weapons when they show up? Well, guess what? They put pictures of themselves out brandishing rifles. I mean, there were these two extreme, radical, violent individuals who came up from Ontario, where this is what they do in Ontario. They were out in the Northwest around the protest site with rifles. They were shooting. They were posting videos of themselves doing this, wearing camouflage. They weren't hunting. They were just showing off their weapons. And they put it on social media. I mean, it's obviously an invitation. So the police, when they do come equipped with all the precautions to make sure that no one gets hurt in this. And when the result is that, they show up with arms, which they obviously have to do, then that becomes the storyline of, heavily armed police show up. Why do they need them? We're just innocent, poor protesters here with our, little shack that we're trying to stop this horrible project. And, time and again, certain segment of the population falls for it, but I think if you're, used to watching these things as I am, it's just, okay, here we go.
Now, on the positive front here, when it comes to energy, there's going to be more LNG available for Asia, I guess, in the not too distant future. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, we've seen in recent times that the big growth in liquefied natural gas, which is a cleaner energy alternative that the world is dying for. I mean, after the Glasgow climate conference, which ended recently, everyone came away saying, how do we get more clean energy? We've got to do this. We've got to reduce emissions. We've got to get to net zero by 2050. All of these goals. Well, one of the many things to do is to substitute cleaner energy. I know there's people out there saying, no, you can only have perfect energy, the elusive perfect energy that has no negative consequences. It has no emissions. It doesn't require any mining. It doesn't require any nuclear. We can only have perfect energy. Well, there is no perfect energy, Jim. I mean, you know that. LNG, warts and all, is a pretty good energy source. And that's why the world is adopting it rapidly. And the United States recently has been the region of the world that has increased its export and supply of LNG so others can get on the clean energy track. And Canada has, although we're building the biggest private capital project ever in Canadian history for LNG in Northwest BC, that's what that pipeline is about, as well as the LNG Canada site terminal in Kitimat. We're kind of we're a minnow. We're barely on the map in terms of the global picture, which is kind of weird because we have so much gas of a good quality located in Western Canada. We should be and we can be getting that to market. So this week there was some great news for Woodfibre LNG, which is a smaller project north of Vancouver on Howe Sound. It's a $2 billion project, and the big news this week was that they've inked a deal with an engineering firm that's going to move into the construction phase. So that thing is moving forward. It's really great news. It's a small step in the right direction, and then LNG Canada is that bigger one, probably I think about 6 times bigger in terms of the amount of LNG that will be produced. So, I mean, this is way for Canada's natural advantage as a place that has the good luck of geology to have a lot of gas in the ground to be able to get it to places where they don't have it and they want it so that they can meet their own climate obligations. I mean, none of this stuff is easy.
Stewart, a few shows ago, you explained to us just how valuable just one of those LNG tankers is. Can you maybe tell us how much wealth does it mean for Canada in terms of jobs, royalties, and so on when one of those ships that looks like it's carrying giant golf balls sails away?
Yeah, it's almost difficult to believe. It defies the imagination when you look at the scale of it, because one LNG tanker ship that leaves ports is just so valuable. It's $100 million of cargo in that one ship, depending on commodity prices at the time. And recently there were quite high LNG prices, and I noticed that the value of a cargo was at a near record high. So I just worked out, what if the LNG Canada project, which won't be finished till 2025, but what if it was operating today? What if? And we know that it's got 350 ships a year, 100 million plus US is the value of one cargo right now. So, do the math there, and you've got a $48 billion Canadian project in terms of the value of the gas that it would sell if it had today's prices, which I think is quite likely to occur again in future. And so you might ask, well, that's a big figure. What does it mean? Well, yeah, it's big. The value of total Canadian goods exports is barely $200 billion a year. Well, not even, actually. So you add 48 billion to that, and that's one country's national trade. That's, you're increasing it by about a fifth. That's enormous from one project. So, we have enough gas where for the duration when humans are relying heavily on fossil fuels for their fuels, we'll always need oil and gas for the thousands of things that we manufacture that aren't fuels, that aren't burned. But for that component, we have so much gas, the richness of it, that we can supply people with it. We can do so the highest environmental standards anywhere in the world. I don't care what you say. There's so many studies and evidence that show this. We ought to be doing it. And when you have basically anarchists and the highly militant armed resistance of who knows what they're resisting, but you put these people together of the anarchists and warriors, and they try to oppose a pipeline and claim to speak for the local First Nations in the Northwest, which is what they're doing, even though they don't represent the local First Nations in any sense. You've got a deliberate act to slow down action on climate change. That's what it amounts to, and it's incredibly irresponsible.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, Tersa Earth, what is it? Why is it interesting?
It's a firm. It comes out of UBC, and the news this week is that Dr. Vikram Yadav, the founder and CEO, I'm a co-founder of this company, has been named among Canada's top 40 under 40. He's also been named at the same time to Business in Vancouver's British Columbia top 40 under 40. He's on both of these lists. He's 37 years old. He's quite a guy. I've got to know him over the last couple of years. He's an expert on synthetic biology and industrial biotechnology. He's an associate professor at UBC's Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering. And this recognition is because of what he's been doing. He started a company a couple of years ago. It was acquired by a Bill Gates-backed innovation firm. It was in the area of oil sands tailings treatment. And now the new company, Tersa Earth Innovations, is involved in a totally different problem, which is acid rock drainage. If anyone is listening from the world of mining, you'll recognize this. It's what happens in certain settings where tailings waste develops acidity, and that is an environmental hazard that has to be managed. It can be very expensive to manage it. So you think, okay, down the road, as the global transportation fleet moves from fossil fuels to electricity, which is a general trend, we will need to have the energy metals required for that to be produced in larger numbers. No one disputes that. Much larger numbers. One thing that's happened over recent decades is that the quality of ores has been lower and lower. The good stuff that's easy to get at has been mined. So what we're mining now and into the future is going to be minerals that come with more overburden that has to be removed and stored. And that's where you have this problem of acid rock drainage on a much larger scale than we have today. And it's already a major problem. So using natural processes, and this is drawn from the domain of biology, Vikram Yadav has pioneered ways to treat this in a way that also reduces emissions and is very much in tune with the whole thrust of net zero.
And I'm just trying to remember the name of Britannia. The Britannia mine between Vancouver and Whistler was a major source of acid fallout. After the mine was closed, this acid would leach out. It destroyed a lot of the plant and wildlife in the waters just off the mine. They've cleared that up since. So looking at, and all that wildlife has come back. Orcas now frolic there. You can find crabs in the water and so on. This is a real important move if we're going to go to, instead of using fuel tanks in our cars, to batteries.
Yeah, this is needed. Yeah, the story of House Down and Britannia Mine is one of applied science, and that's a case where this problem was dealt with by a treatment process, water treatment. Very expensive, took a long time to get to, and we're going to need this kind of innovation on just a massive scale. It's not just the mines of the past where there are, historic pollution problems that need to be cleaned up, which is what Britannia represents. It's been quite a few decades since that mine was operating, even though the ill effects live on. And you've got that all over the world. There's quite a number of sites in Canada where that's the case. But you've also got the idea here that, all right, what about that new mine being proposed there? If the risk is that it will develop acid rock characteristics, how can we ensure that in moving forward with plans to develop that mine, that it has a proper process that will ensure that we don't see problems develop from that? And that's where Dr. Yadav's innovation comes in. I think that's maybe the most important part is enabling production in the future, not just problems of the past. I mean, it can do both.
Stewart, is there anything else we should be keeping a close eye on right now?
Well, one thing, people are looking at the cost of fuel. We've got inflation. We've got the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which as we speak is still down. There's a very long, it's about, 900 miles of line or kilometers, should I say, from Burnaby to Edmonton for that line. And it all has to be inspected. I know they're working very, very quickly to do that, but it's a lot of work and they can't afford to, do it, in such a way that they overlook anything. So, great care is being taken there. This has consequences for the supply chain, and I think the fact that we're able to get fueled up and there's gas at the gas stations is a real tribute to the logistics people and the energy providers who have worked unsung. And so I'd like to just give a bit of a shout out to them. I mean, thanks all you people for the work you do. It often isn't noticed. We just take it for granted, but here's an occasion where I think everyone who benefits from it could give a moment of thought to say thanks, everyone, for doing that for us.
And because of the flooding, the rail lines, the pipelines, the highways that have been cut and are still cut going into Vancouver, in the greater Vancouver area, residents are limited to a 30-liter or 7.5 U.S. gallon purchase of gasoline at a time. So we are being affected by these floods, whether you realize it or not. And maybe for the average person, 30 liters is enough. But if you run a business and have to haul supplies around town, 30 liters is just a drop in the bucket, literally.
Yeah, that's right. You look at freight. I mean, I would imagine that if you're a commercial operator, there's ways to get what you need. But yeah, this kind of thing, I suppose, is meant to ensure that there's not hoarding of gasoline. As we saw with toilet paper, that was, the lineups we saw, people wanting to fill up the gas tanks. I thought that was pretty reasonable. But when someone pulls up, opens the trunk, and the back is full of jerry cans that they're filling, that's not only dangerous, but it's also selfish.
Gosh, during a hurricane in Florida, I saw people filling plastic bags full of gas and putting them in their trunk. That must have been an exciting trip home.
Yes.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com, or check him out on Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com and we'll ask that question for you. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at House Street. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.